going to be continuing our lesson on comparing fractions to 1/2. We're going to start by reminding ourselves about the work we did last time and then learn a new strategy for comparing fractions to 1/2. Remember that last time we said 1/2 is a benchmark fraction. A benchmark fraction is an important fraction that we use to help us understand how big or small other fractions are. Last time we used number lines to help us figure out whether fractions were larger or smaller than 1/2. Remember that we said when comparing fractions, we always have to make sure that the whole is the same size, right? So the whole from 0 to 1 on both number lines is the same size. The zeros are lined up and the ones are lined up. Then we said we can look at what fraction lines up with the 1/2. What fraction is equivalent to 1/2 that can help us figure out whether another fraction is larger or smaller. So in this situation, we have 2/6, and we want to know what fraction that has a 6 as the denominator is equal to 1/2. This number line shows us that 3/6 is the fraction where 6 is the denominator and it's equal to 1/2. 1/2 and 3/6 are equal. So we could replace 1/2 with 3/6 because they mean the same thing. And then it's easy to see that 3 of these things called 6 is more than 2 of these things called 6, right? Because as we move along the number line, there's 2/6 and we have to move farther along the number line to get to 3/6. Now that we know that 3/6 is greater than 2/6, we can think back to our original question, which asked about 1/2. 3/6 is the same as 1/2, so we can just put 1/2 back in there and know that 1/2 is larger than 2/6. And that makes sense on our number line because here's where 2/6 is and 1/2 is farther along. That's what we worked on last time. Today, we're going to try a new strategy. Today, let's talk about 1/2 and 3/4. We're not going to use number lines this time. We're going to use some shapes in the hopes that they're going to help us learn how to think about this mathematically and maybe not even need shapes or number lines in the future. So let's start by just looking at 3/4. If I wanted to show 3/4 on this rectangle, I would start by partitioning the rectangle into fourths. Now, I know that I want to compare that 3/4 to 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and show 3/4, and then I'm going to make another shape that's partitioned into fourths. And I want to know if this shape is partitioned into fourths, how much would 1/2 of this shape be? If I just colored in half of this shape, how much would that be? And would it be bigger or less than 3/4? Well, what I need to do is think about this 4. This shape has 4 pieces, and I need to think if I cut 4 in half, how many pieces would that be? What is half of 4? I bet you are already thinking about the correct answer to that. Half of 4 is 2, right? If I cut 4 items in half, if I split them into 2 equal parts, I would have 2 over here and 2 over here. That would be half. So I can color in 2/4 of this shape because that's half of this shape. Well, now I can see easily that 2/4 is less than 3/4, right? 3/4 has more colored in, 2/4 has less colored in. But again, my original question didn't ask about 2/4, it asked about half. But now I know that 2/4 is the same as 1/2, so I can just put my 1/2 back in there and know that 1/2 is also less than 3/4. Let's look at this with another problem. 3/8 and 1/2. Again, I want to really focus on the 3/8 to begin. I want to think about what fraction that has an 8 in the denominator would be the same as a half. Well, here's my rectangle partitioned into 8 pieces. How many pieces would I color in to get half of it colored in? You're right. Half of 8 is 4. So coloring in half of that shape would mean coloring in 4 of those equal pieces. You can see here that half of this and half of this piece of this rectangle that's just partitioned into 2, they're the same, right? They are the same width, they're the same height. I can show you there. Okay, so they are the same. So if this is 4/8 is colored in, and that's the same as a half, and I want to know about 3/8, well, one thing I can do first of all is I can change this 1/2 to 4/8, right? Because that's the same as 1/2, and now it's easy to see, oh, 3 of these things called 8 is going to be less than 4 of these things called 8ths. And if you watch this picture here while I change it, you'll see, right? I take one of those away, 3 is less. 4 is more, 3 is less. So 3/8 is less than 4/8. And since 4/8 is the same as 1/2, I can say that 3/8 is less than 1/2. For today's seesaw activity, you're going to be asked to compare 1/2 to other fractions. Some of the screens will look like this with shapes on them, and some of them will use number lines. In both situations, you need to show the fraction on the shape or the number line. So coloring in the fraction or circling the number line to show what fractions you're talking about. That is part of showing your math thinking. Please also remember that the alligator's mouth always eats the bigger fraction. The alligator is super hungry and always eats the bigger amount. All right, good luck and enjoy your math.